So today is Armed Forces Day.
And President Cyril Ramaphosa has lauded the work done by South African National Defence Force members.
In his capacity as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, President Ramaphosa says the SANDF continues to ensure that there is stability in the country. He was speaking at the annual commemoration of the death of over 600 black South African soldiers who died on the SS Mendi in 1917.
This happened 106 years ago. That ship sank as it transported soldiers to France during the First World War.
Armed Forces Day, the South African Defence Force showcasing the country's military capabilities. This day, set aside for the country's last line of defence. These men and women in their uniform who have vowed to defend their country with their lives gathered in their numbers. Parades from all the wings of the South African Defence Force. Honouring them, the Commander-in-Chief and President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, has applauded them for their selfless service.
They have picked up the spears of our fallen heroes and heroines and continue the effort to give our people lasting peace, security and stability.
This day is also set aside to remember those who lost their lives in service. This year marks 106 years since the sinking of the SS Mendi, which was carrying over 600 black soldiers. The troops were deployed to the forefront of the First World War.
On this day, we remember and pay tribute to all our fallen men and women in uniform who have lost their lives in the line of duty.
And a tribute to Sergeant Busi Mabena. Mabena was killed by a sniper while at the United Nations peacekeeping mission in the DRC.
We mourn all those who have lost their lives in the effort to silence the guns on our continent. Just 2 weeks ago, we lost Flight Sergeant Busi Mabena when his helicopter came under attack in eastern DRC. We extend our deepest sympathies and condolences to his family, his friends, and his colleagues.
President Ramaphosa says the SANDF is an integral part of ensuring the stability of the country, particularly in relations to the ills that bedevil society.
I salute you all who carry out tasks in time of disaster that literally stand between life and death. We commend the exemplary selflessness, self-sacrifice and patriotism of our armed forces who, even in the face of great danger, always put the interests of the country first.
Even while the South African National Defence Force continues to face financial challenges, these men and women in uniform continue to put their lives at risk on the forefront. Nhlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Richards Bay.
Well, apart from commemorating the deaths of the officers on the SS Mendi, Armed Forces Day is meant to bring South Africans closer to the men and women who protect the country's borders. Residents of Richards Bay in KwaZulu-Natal turned out in their numbers for the day. Let's examine the state of the force now. To discuss, we're joined by the head of the Department of Strategic Studies in the Faculty of Military Science at Stellenbosch University, and that is Professor Abel Esterhazy. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Today was a chance for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force to show off. There was a parade of vehicles, gun salutes, a fly past. Did it make the right impression?
Yeah, there is, of course, deep symbolism in everything the military is doing, especially when they're on parade. And so this parade is, on the one hand, commemorating those who've paid with their lives. But at the same time, it is also a symbolic way of subordinating themselves to the political authorities in this country. We are a democracy. And with the president taking the salute, of course, it's a symbolic way of the military subordinating themselves to the president. And of course, they're handing out medals at a parade like this. It's also recognition to the military for the good work that they are doing. And our military is doing a lot of good work in our society.
Well, on that, given that we're in a tough place as a nation, the president said something interesting, that the armed forces do more than just defend our sovereignty and the democratic order. He said they actively contribute to the social and economic development of South Africa. Do you agree?
Well, absolutely. The idea of defense is a very broad idea. Of course, our defense force is in the first instance there to protect and defend us. But if you go to the secondary role of the defense force, you will find them doing a lot of good work in society. They are protecting the borders. In fact, the idea of defense is in many ways becoming the secondary role, and their primary function becomes one of building society, assisting society, helping society. Today, we see our military deployed on the borders. We see them in the fight against crime. We see them in disasters, deploying in disastrous areas. So the military is indeed becoming, in a negative way, sometimes of a stopgap institution for government to assist where no other State Department can be of use and can assist.
So that is especially important now because of cable theft, because of the concerns of unrest as the stages of rolling blackouts increase. However, when we saw the unrest, the SANDF was there, but there were some reported problems, for example, with vehicles and moving around. So that exposed some weaknesses. Do you agree?
Well, there's no doubt about that. I think the report that was done by Professor Sandy Africa in the aftermath of the 2021 uprisings in KwaZulu-Natal have highlighted the challenges that our security forces are sitting with. In fact, the report was in many ways very blunt, stating that we are sitting with a hollowed out force, and that's quite harsh words to use in describing the military. We know that our defense budget is not suitable for the role and the functions of our military in society. And the problem here is that it's now been coming for over 20 years that the budget has not been sufficient. And of course, there's also the question as to how the defense force is spending that money. In fact, one is at a point where you need to ask the question as to whether the defense force has the money to do what it is doing here, to present this parade that is costing 220 million rand. And you ask yourself, what else could the defense force have done with this money? There's a lot of people that's deployed for the parade. There's a lot of equipment that's deployed for the parade. And so there's also a sort of a red light coming on when you talk about the parade.
So last year, the minister spoke to MPs during the defence budget that was 49 billion and confessed that over half, 69% goes on paying salaries. So the concern has been growing that a lot of the money is going to pay members of the force, and a lot of them are in senior positions. We know it's very top heavy, a lot of generals compared to lower ranks. She did speak about right sizing happening. Is that happening at the required pace? Because surely if more money is needed, the force also has to come to the party.
Well, I don't see that happening at the moment, and I don't see that happening at a fast pace anyway. But let me just say this about the personnel expenditure in the Defence Forces personnel expenditure, and this is a very important point that we need to understand. You know, the higher order notion in securing our country is the idea of human security. And if we talk about human security, then part of the human security agenda is the employment of as many people as possible. And this then raises the question as to what is the government using the Defence Force for? Is the government not using the Defence Force precisely for that, to deploy or rather to employ as many people as possible, to provide as many people as possible with a salary through the Defence Force? In other words, make the Defence Force not an equipment-driven Defence Force, but rather a people-driven Defence Force. And so this is a debate, I think, that we ought to have. Of course, we are paying way too much for personnel expenditures. But I think there's more nuances to the debate at the moment that we need to capture.
I wish we could discuss it further, Prof, but we're running out of time. So let me say quickly, let me just get your comment on the optics of the Navy doing that drill with Russia and China. Of course, it came around the anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. The government has spoken about this, saying it's standard, they do it annually, they can learn from the Russians. But what do you think the reputational impact has been, maybe internally? South Africans looking at their armed forces?
Well, I think if we think about the naval exercise, the important factor that one needs to raise is the fact that there's always more context to context. And I think in this case, the context in particular matters. We need to understand that Russia is a state at war. And what Russia is doing in the conduct of that war is not something that South Africa really wants to associate itself with. So I think there's deep ethical issues here that we need to discuss in terms of this exercise. And I don't think it is highlighted enough and discussed enough and debated enough in our society at large.
All right, thank you. I hope we can chat again. That was Professor from Stellenbosch University, the Department of Military Science, Professor Abel Esterhazy.